The African sun rises over one of the continent's most magnificent wildlife sanctuaries, painting the savanna in shades of gold and amber. Kruger National Park in South Africa stands as a testament to nature's raw beauty and untamed spirit, home to countless species that roam freely across its vast expanse. Among these creatures, the lions reign supreme, their powerful roars echoing through the wilderness as a reminder of their dominance in this ecosystem. The park has long been celebrated for its thriving lion population, with numerous prides calling this protected land their home. Rangers and wildlife enthusiasts from around the world come here to witness these majestic predators in their natural habitat, observing their hunting patterns, social structures, and the delicate balance they maintain within the food chain. But nothing could have prepared the park's dedicated team of rangers for the mysterious events that were about to unfold, events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary morning at the park's main entrance. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, the ranger on duty noticed something unusual. Standing just beyond the gate, partially obscured by the morning mist, was a fully grown lioness. Her presence alone wasn't particularly alarming, as lions occasionally wandered near the park boundaries. However, what caught the ranger's attention was her behavior. She wasn't hunting, wasn't resting, and didn't appear to be passing through. Instead, she stood there with an intensity that seemed purposeful, her gaze fixed on the gate as if she was waiting for something or someone. The ranger watched carefully, maintaining his position while documenting the sighting in the daily log. After roughly an hour of this strange vigil, the lioness turned and disappeared back into the dense vegetation, leaving the ranger puzzled but relieved that no confrontation had occurred. The next morning brought an identical scenario. The same lioness returned to the exact same spot at the gate, assuming the same watchful posture. She paced slowly back and forth along the fence line, occasionally pausing to look directly at the ranger station. Her movements were deliberate and measured, lacking any signs of aggression or territorial display. There were no bared teeth, no threatening postures, no attempts to breach the perimeter. She simply walked, watched, and waited. When the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the African landscape, she would retreat once again into the wilderness. By the third consecutive morning, word of the lioness's unusual behavior had spread throughout the ranger station. Staff members began gathering at the gate during the early hours, curious to witness this phenomenon for themselves. Some veterans who had worked in wildlife conservation for decades admitted they had never seen anything quite like this. Lions were unpredictable creatures, capable of both remarkable patience and explosive violence, making it impossible to determine their intentions through casual observation. Commander Kagiso, the head of the park's protection team, found himself increasingly concerned about the situation. His primary responsibility was ensuring the safety of both the wildlife within the park and the rangers who protected them. The lioness's persistent appearances created an uncertain element that troubled him deeply. He gathered his team for a briefing, discussing various theories about what might be driving this behavior. Some rangers speculated that the lioness might be a young animal separated from her pride, confused and seeking direction. Others worried that she could be scouting the area, testing the defenses before launching an attack on livestock or even attempting to enter the populated areas beyond the park. The more pessimistic voices suggested she might be sick or injured, displaying abnormal behavior as a result of physical distress. One particularly concerning theory proposed that she was extremely hungry and had identified the park entrance as a potential hunting ground, perhaps having learned to associate human activity with food sources. Each theory carried its own set of risks and required different responses, making it crucial that they understand the truth behind her actions. As the days progressed and the lioness continued her dawn appearances with unwavering consistency, the tension among the rangers grew. They took extra precautions, ensuring that all safety protocols were strictly followed. Weapons were checked and ready, communication devices were tested regularly, and everyone remained on high alert during those critical morning hours. Despite their preparedness, there was an underlying unease that permeated the station. Lioness had become a mystery that demanded solving, not just for the safety of the team, but for the sake of the animal herself. Commander Kagiso understood that they couldn't simply wait indefinitely for the situation to resolve itself. Wild animals operating outside their normal behavioral patterns often indicated deeper problems that could escalate if left unaddressed. He spent sleepless nights reviewing incident reports from other parks, searching for similar cases that might provide insight. His research yielded few comparable situations, which only deepened his concern. Recognizing that his team's expertise had reached its limits, Commander Kagiso decided to seek outside help. He needed someone with specialized knowledge in animal behavior, someone who could interpret the subtle signals and patterns that the lioness was displaying. He reached out to Dr. Malibong, a renowned wildlife researcher and zoologist whose work in understanding big cat behavior had earned him respect throughout the conservation community. Dr. Malibong had spent years studying lions, leopards, and other predators across various African ecosystems, documenting their communication methods, social dynamics, and responses to environmental changes. His published research had helped shape conservation strategies and improve human-wildlife conflict resolution in multiple regions. When Commander Kagiso's call came through, explaining the unusual situation at Kruger National Park, Dr. Malibong found himself both intrigued and puzzled. In all his years of field research and academic study, he had never encountered reports of a lion exhibiting such persistent and non-aggressive behavior toward human installations. Dr. Malibong immediately recognized the importance of investigating this case personally. He cleared his schedule, gathered his research equipment, and made arrangements to travel to the park. The journey gave him time to consider various possibilities and formulate a preliminary research plan. He understood that premature conclusions could be dangerous, both for the humans involved and for the lioness herself. Too often, unusual animal behavior was met with lethal force based on fear rather than understanding. He was determined to ensure that this situation would be handled with the scientific rigor and compassion it deserved. Upon arriving at Kruger National Park, Dr. Malibong was immediately struck by the atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that hung over the ranger station. The staff members he met were clearly dedicated professionals, but their faces showed the strain of days spent in heightened alertness. Commander Kagiso greeted him warmly and wasted no time in providing a comprehensive briefing about the lioness's appearances, showing him the detailed logs that had been maintained since the first sighting. The two men walked the perimeter together, with Kagiso pointing out the exact locations where the lioness had been spotted and describing her movements in detail. Dr. Malibong listened carefully, asking pointed questions about timing, weather conditions, the lioness's physical condition, and any vocalizations she had made. He examined the ground near the fence, looking for tracks and other physical evidence that might provide clues. The lioness's paw prints were clearly visible in several areas, confirming that she had indeed been pacing along the same route repeatedly. The depth and spacing of the prints suggested a healthy adult female, neither emaciated from hunger nor laboring under injury. This observation immediately cast doubt on several of the prevailing theories among the rangers. A starving lion would show different movement patterns, and an injured one would likely leave asymmetrical tracks or avoid putting weight on an affected limb. Dr. Malibong proposed a systematic observation protocol that would allow them to gather more detailed data about the lioness's behavior. He explained that understanding animal behavior required patience and careful documentation of every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem at first glance. He requested that the rangers record not just when the lioness appeared and departed, but also note her body language, the direction of her gaze, the frequency and intensity of any vocalizations, and her reactions to various stimuli around her. He wanted to know if she responded to vehicle sounds, human voices, or other environmental factors. This methodical approach would help them build a comprehensive behavioral profile that could reveal her true intentions. Some rangers remained skeptical, still believing that the lioness represented a threat that should be dealt with more directly. However, Commander Kagiso's confidence in Dr. Malibong's expertise helped convince the team to follow the researchers' plan. The observation period began the following morning, with Dr. Malibong and a small team of rangers positioned at strategic points around the gate. As predicted, the Lioness appeared just as dawn was breaking, emerging from the vegetation with the same purposeful stride that had characterized her previous visits. Dr. Malibong watched through high-powered binoculars, noting every detail of her appearance and behavior. What he saw fascinated him. The Lioness's body language spoke volumes to his trained eye. Her ears were forward and alert, but not flattened in aggression. Her tail moved in a relaxed manner, rather than the sharp, agitated lashing that would indicate anger or frustration. Most tellingly, her eyes held no predatory focus. She wasn't scanning for prey or evaluating potential targets. Instead, she seemed to be looking at the humans themselves, making eye contact in a way that was highly unusual for a wild lion. She would pause periodically to emit low, rumbling vocalizations that were neither roars of challenge nor aggressive growls. These sounds were softer, almost plaintive in quality. As the hours passed and Dr. Malibong continued his careful observation, a startling possibility began to form in his mind. The Lioness's behavior was consistent with something he had read about in historical accounts and rare case studies, but had never witnessed himself. A wild animal deliberately seeking human assistance. It seemed almost impossible, defying conventional understanding of predator-human dynamics. Wild lions were supposed to avoid human contact, viewing people as either threats or, at best, irrelevant to their lives. The idea that one would actively seek out humans for help challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife behavior. Yet the evidence before him was compelling. The Lioness showed no fear, no aggression, no hunting behavior. She appeared to be waiting, calling out, trying to communicate something important. Dr. Malibong knew that his hypothesis would sound absurd to many people, perhaps even to his fellow researchers. However, scientific integrity demanded that he follow the evidence wherever it led, regardless of how unconventional the conclusion might be. That evening, Dr. Malibong called for a meeting with Commander Kagiso in the station's command office. The two men sat across from each other, the weight of the situation evident in their expressions. Dr. Malibong carefully presented his observations and his preliminary conclusion. He explained that the Lioness's behavior was inconsistent with any form of threat or aggression. Her persistent returns to the same location, her non-threatening posture, and her vocalizations all suggested that she was trying to communicate a need or a problem that she couldn't solve on her own. He proposed what he knew would sound like an extraordinary theory. The Lioness was asking for human help. Commander Kagiso listened intently, his initial reaction one of disbelief. The concept seemed to belong more to folklore than to serious wildlife management. However, as Dr. Malibong walked him through the behavioral evidence point by point, explaining the subtle signals and comparing them to documented cases of animal intelligence and problem-solving, Kagiso found his skepticism wavering. The commander was a practical man who had built his career on making sound judgments based on available evidence. He trusted Dr. Malibong's expertise and recognized that the researcher's reputation had been earned through rigorous scientific work, not speculation or sensationalism. If there was even a possibility that the Lioness genuinely needed help, they had a responsibility to investigate further. After considerable deliberation, Commander Kagiso made a decision that would prove to be crucial. He agreed to authorize a tracking expedition that would follow the Lioness when she departed the gate, attempting to discover where she went and what might be driving her unusual behavior. It was a risky proposition that would require careful planning and execution. Following a wild lioness through the African bush carried inherent dangers, and there was no guarantee that doing so would provide any answers. However, both men agreed that the potential benefits outweighed the risks, especially if it meant preventing a future conflict or helping an animal in distress. News of the planned expedition spread quickly through the ranger station, generating a mixture of excitement and apprehension among the staff. Many rangers volunteered for the mission, viewing it as a unique opportunity to be part of something potentially groundbreaking in wildlife conservation. They understood the risks involved, but were driven by curiosity and a genuine desire to help resolve the mystery. Dr. Malibong selected a team based on experience, physical fitness, and temperament. He needed people who could remain calm under pressure, follow instructions precisely, and show respect for the wild animal they would be tracking. That evening, he conducted a thorough briefing, explaining the protocols they would follow. He emphasized the importance of maintaining a safe distance, moving quietly to avoid startling the lioness, and being prepared to retreat immediately if she showed any signs of aggression. He distributed safety equipment and ensured that everyone understood the communication signals they would use during the mission. The night before the expedition, the ranger station buzzed with anticipation. Equipment was checked and double-checked. Water supplies, first aid kits, tracking devices, and communication radios were all prepared and organized. Dr. Malibong reviewed his notes one final time, considering various scenarios they might encounter. He knew that they were embarking on something unprecedented, and the weight of responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders. If his theory was wrong, he could be leading the team into a dangerous situation based on a misinterpretation of animal behavior. However, his scientific training and years of experience in the field gave him confidence in his analysis. The lioness had been trying to tell them something, and tomorrow they would finally have the opportunity to discover what it was. As the first light of dawn approached, the tracking team assembled near the park gate, their nerves balanced by determination. They took up concealed positions that would allow them to observe the lioness without being too visible themselves. The waiting was tense, each person lost in their own thoughts about what the day might bring. Then, right on schedule, the lioness appeared. She emerged from the shadowy vegetation with the same purposeful stride they had come to recognize. She moved to her usual spot near the gate, pausing to look toward the ranger station. Her mouth opened, releasing those same low, resonant vocalizations that had become so familiar. She paced back and forth several times, her movements displaying that strange combination of urgency and patience. The team watched in silence, their hearts pounding with anticipation. After approximately an hour, the lioness began to move away from the gate, heading back into the wilderness. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Dr. Malibong gave a subtle hand signal, and the tracking mission began. The team split into two smaller groups as planned, allowing them to maintain visual contact with the lioness from multiple angles while reducing the chances of detection. They moved carefully through the terrain, stepping over fallen branches and navigating around dense thorn bushes. The African sun climbed higher, and the temperature began to rise, but the team's focus never wavered. The lioness maintained a steady pace, occasionally pausing to look back over her shoulder. These moments sent ripples of tension through the tracking teams, but the lioness never showed signs of alarm or aggression. It was as if she knew she was being followed and accepted their presence. Dr. Malibong found this behavior remarkable and further confirmation of his theory. A typical wild lion being stalked by humans would either flee or prepare to defend itself. This lioness did neither, suggesting that she wanted them to follow. The journey continued for hours, leading them deeper into the park's interior. The landscape varied from open grassland to dense woodland, testing the team's stamina and navigation skills. They crossed dry riverbeds where the soil cracked under the relentless sun and passed through areas where recent wildfires had left the vegetation blackened and sparse. Throughout it all, the lioness maintained her course with unwavering determination. She was leading them somewhere specific, of that Dr. Malibong was now certain. As they progressed, he noticed that they were moving generally toward an area near the Sabi River, a waterway that could be both life-giving and treacherous depending on conditions. He recalled that there had been significant rainfall upstream several days earlier, which would have caused the river to swell with fast-moving water. When the group finally reached the area near the river, the landscape opened up before them. The Sabi River, usually a moderate flow during this season, was indeed rushing with unusual force. The recent rains had transformed it into a powerful torrent that churned and roared as it carved through the terrain. The riverbanks showed clear signs of erosion, with chunks of soil having been washed away and vegetation torn loose by the water's force. The lioness's tracks led directly toward the water's edge, then seemed to disappear. The team spread out carefully, searching for any indication of where she had gone. Some rangers speculated that she might have crossed the river, though the current looked dangerously strong for such an attempt. Others worried that they might have lost her trail entirely. Then one of the rangers called out softly, pointing upstream toward a rocky section of the riverbank. There, standing on a large boulder that jutted out into the water, was the lioness. Her silhouette against the bright sky was striking, and even from a distance, the team could sense her agitation. She was moving restlessly on the rock, pacing in the limited space available to her. Her head turned frequently toward a specific point along the eroded riverbank, and she periodically vocalized those same low calls they had heard at the park gate, but now more urgent in tone. The team began the careful process of finding a way to cross the river safely. The water was too deep and fast for a direct crossing, so they moved along the bank looking for a shallow area where they might wade across without being swept away by the current. The sound of rushing water was deafening, making communication difficult. Each step had to be chosen carefully, as the wet rocks and mud made the footing treacherous. The lioness remained on her boulder, occasionally roaring as if urging them to hurry. When they finally managed to cross and approach the area where the lioness had been focused, Dr. Malibong's heart began to race. The riverbank here showed severe damage from the recent flooding and erosion. A section of the bank had collapsed, creating a tumble of rocks, mud, and debris. As they drew closer, maintaining their safe distance from the lioness, they heard something that made everyone freeze in their tracks. From beneath the pile of rocks came a faint, muffled sound. It was a weak cry, barely audible over the noise of the river, but unmistakably the sound of distress. Two rangers immediately stepped forward, their training taking over as they began to assess the situation. The pile of rocks was substantial, clearly the result of a landslide triggered by the combination of rain and erosion. Moving the rocks would require careful work to avoid causing further collapse or injuring whatever was trapped beneath. Dr. Malibong positioned himself where he could observe both the work and the lioness. As the rangers began carefully removing rocks using crowbars and their hands, working with patient precision despite the urgency they all felt, the lioness watched intently from her position nearby. Her body language had changed noticeably. The restlessness had given way to focused attention, her eyes never leaving the rangers and the rock pile. Each time a rock was moved, she seemed to tense, as if wanting to help but understanding that she couldn't. When the rangers finally created an opening large enough to see into the space beneath, Dr. Malibong shone his flashlight into the gap. What he saw confirmed his theory in the most profound way possible and brought immediate understanding to all the mysterious behavior they had witnessed. Inside the collapsed den, exhausted and frightened, were two lion cubs. Their small bodies were covered in dust, and their eyes reflected the flashlight beam with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The full picture suddenly became crystal clear to everyone present. This wasn't just any lioness exhibiting unusual behavior. She was a mother whose cubs had become trapped when the heavy rains caused a landslide that blocked their den. She had tried to dig them out herself, but the rocks were too heavy and too numerous for her to move alone. In what could only be described as a remarkable display of intelligence and desperation, she had sought help from the only creatures she knew had the tools and capability to move such obstacles: humans. Her repeated appearances at the park gate hadn't been threats or confusion. They had been pleas. She had been asking, as clearly as a lion could ask, for help to save her babies. The realization left the entire team momentarily stunned, humbled by the trust and intelligence this wild animal had demonstrated. Then training and compassion took over, and they redoubled their efforts to free the trapped cubs. Working with extreme care to avoid injuring the fragile young animals, the rangers removed rock after rock from the collapsed den. Sweat poured down their faces from both the physical exertion and the tension of the delicate operation. Every movement had to be calculated to prevent further collapse while creating enough space to extract the cubs safely. The mother lioness remained nearby, her powerful body coiled with tension but showing no aggression toward the humans who were working to save her offspring. Her occasional vocalizations now made complete sense. She was encouraging them, communicating with her trapped cubs, expressing emotions that transcended species barriers. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually less than an hour of focused work, the rangers succeeded in creating an opening large enough to reach the cubs. They gently pulled out the first cub, a small female who was trembling but appeared to be uninjured. Moments later, they extracted the second cub, a male who was similarly shaken, but alive. Both cubs were dehydrated and exhausted from their ordeal, but otherwise seemed to have survived their entombment remarkably well. The rangers at Kruger National Park carried the memory of those extraordinary days with them, a reminder that the boundary between human and animal intelligence, between wild and civilized, was far less clear than many people believed. The story spread beyond the park, reaching conservation communities worldwide, sparking discussions about animal intelligence, the ethics of wildlife management, and the potential for cooperation between humans and wild animals. It became a powerful argument for compassion-based conservation, for taking the time to understand rather than react with fear. She had shown that maternal love transcends species, that the drive to protect one's young can overcome even the deepest instincts of caution and territoriality. Her story became a symbol of hope, a testament to what is possible when humans approach wildlife not with dominance, but with understanding and compassion. And so the legend of the lioness who asked for help lives on, inspiring new generations of conservationists, researchers, and nature lovers to look deeper, to question their assumptions, and to remember that every animal they encounter has its own story, its own needs, and its own remarkable capacity for thought and feeling.